I have the pleasure today to introduce my colleague David Lyon. David, of course, is the project director of the SSHRC MCRI research project on the new transparency, surveillance, and social sorting. David is also a professor of sociology here at Queen's. He's a Queen's Research Chair and a Killam Fellow, and at least in my humble opinion, he has done more as a scholar to advance knowledge within the interdisciplinary research field of surveillance studies than anyone else in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you David Lyon.
Thank you, Art. I'm going to try to give a talk that speaks to both those of you who are part of the project and those of you who have been kind enough to show up just to hear what we are all about. So I'm going to try to cover both, and we'll take a few questions at the end. So if you want to ask questions, then that is fine. I'm going to start with a little clip. This is a clip from an artist group called the Builders Association, and in New York, and it's called Supervision. Unfortunately, we forgot to set up the sound fully, so you might have to strain to hear. I'm going to try to make sure that you can hear the thing, not that hearing it makes a huge amount of difference. The visual is what's important.
My name is John Chester Riley, Social Security 021316155. Born September 9th, 1957, St. Luke's Hospital, Minneapolis, Minnesota. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, eyes brown, definitely male. Mother, Elizabeth Riley. Father, William Riley. Dr. Richard Frankel assisted with the delivery. I entered this world with just a birth certificate, a tax deduction on my parents' IRS 1040, and a hospital bill, later relegated to a landfill in Minnetonka. Gradually, I accumulated a few more paper records. Dental. More hospital. Report cards. Oh yeah, my permanent record at school. But all these records are dead, locked away in a cabinet somewhere. I guess my info started to get connected in the mid-70s. Documentation of my driver's license in the DMV computer, points on that license, my standardized tests, graded now by machine, and with college, a computerized GPA. Then, a real milestone, my first ATM card. And that brought with it my first password. Funny, it seemed so James Bond then, a secret password. Just a few years later, I had 20 of those and a dozen plastic cards in my wallet. ATM, Visa, Discover, Amex, Mobile, barcoded driver's license, telephone calling card, work ID, frequent flyer registration, Bally's and Blockbuster, Stop and Shop Super Saver Club, and the passwords, Yahoo, Food.com, Ameritrade, BarnesandNoble.com, every frequent flyer site, all those forums, and a few pretty unsavory sites too. And I even had a few extra cards for charges I didn't want my wife to see. All of this became a part of me. Over time, it grew more, beefed up by increasing medical records, more complex financial activities, legal records. I helped it grow, and it helped me to function, to live my life.
Now that is the kind of thing that we're interested in this new transparency project. That was obviously from the point of view of the so-called data subject. What we're looking at is how that transparency to so many organizations came about, how it works, and what its consequences are. We're visible to organizations as never before. And that's where we're getting the idea of transparency from. We're going to discuss transparency within our project, and there are some people who are particularly interested in pursuing that concept. But just to say, it relates to the ways in which we are visible to organizations. How that works out, of course, is not always mutual or symmetrical. We certainly can't see necessarily what is going on in the organizations that process the data about us. So we're seen in that dense web of different institutional areas that brush our lives or enclose our lives. Those are the kinds of things that interest us in the new surveillance. Harder, as I say, to see how we are being watched. Organizations tend to be much more opaque. Here's the part where I'll try to explain in a nutshell the kind of background to what we're thinking about intellectually in this project. Surveillance, of course, is universal and something that has been with us throughout human history. Surveillance itself is not new. It's just that for most of human history, surveillance has been on a small, local, and face-to-face scale. It's only in relatively recent times that surveillance came to be something institutional and something that has now become technologically enhanced. So surveillance is there, and we're trying to understand the mechanisms of that surveillance. The technological differences are made in particular today by the coming together of communications, computers, and the codes. Codes are singularly important for encasing those algorithms that make all the difference to the ways in which surveillance is carried out. So it really is something that comes out of what was referred to back in the 1980s as a microelectronics revolution. Then people started to talk about so-called information society. But those kinds of terms didn't really put any content into what was happening to information. It's only when you begin to see the ways in which information is linked with, well, things like risk, that it becomes singularly significant for the kinds of work that we are doing within the surveillance project and within this new transparency program. Information related to risks, perceived, real, however you like to define those risks, information is required to be communicated all the time about the kinds of risks that people are concerned about. And so risk communication needs surveillance. We need those data on populations and on persons in order to address questions of risk. So it's not just information society, but it's information in relation to risk and opportunity, if you think about marketing, for example, that becomes crucially important. How do those data get used? How do they get processed? These, of course, are the big questions. It's not just, all those data are out there. It's who is doing what with them. If you like, we've moved from a stage where you might think that it is who you know that counts, or what you know that counts. It's really who knows about you that we're thinking about in the new transparency. So it's a new situation in many ways. And in fact, we're talking about it within our project as a kind of world historical shift in organization, where surveillance actually becomes the central organizing principle for organizations across a whole range of institutional areas. So we're thinking of surveillance as a major shift, as well as something that is intrinsically, intellectually interesting. It has this dimension of an emerging way of organizing that is both intellectually fascinating to try to understand, raises really large ethical issues, and of course demands political and organizational responses. So it's through categorizing and classifying, above all, that surveillance, as we're thinking about it, works. So basically the idea is that in any of these surveillance practices, our data are being put into categories. Our data are being classified so that one group into which we may fall will be treated differently from another group into which other people fall. The whole point is to classify so that different treatments can be meted out to different groups. And of course, that doesn't put anything immediately sinister or negative, because we organize in so many ways necessarily through such classification in education, in health, and so on and so forth. It's a necessary part of what we do. However, how those classifications are made and what their consequences are huge questions, actually for all of us, not just researchers in surveillance. So these actuarial practices that are based on probabilities of what may happen in the future, or what kinds of behaviors we may exhibit in the future, what kinds of activities we may engage in the future, all those kinds of probabilities are put into the surveillance process for the calculation of likelihood of one outcome or another occurring. And what that does, as the classification process continues, is that the sorting that goes on, the social sorting in the subtitle of our project, the social sorting means that, as we're already discovering and have been for a number of years, that certain kinds of groups and categories tend to be advantaged, and those advantages accumulate, and equally certain groups are disadvantaged, and those disadvantages tend to accumulate. So, in other words, we're looking at one of the mechanisms whereby social differences and social divisions are reinforced and reproduced, replicated for another generation. So that, in brief, is the kind of way that we're seeing surveillance within our project. Key questions. What factors contribute to the general expansion of surveillance as a technology of governance in late modern societies? So that is, what are the origins? Where did this come from? What are those things that are driving surveillance? Then secondly, what are the underlying principles, technologies, infrastructures, institutional frameworks that support... Excuse us. Everything okay back there? I can't see past the pillar. Okay. So...
Just a few bottles of beer, nothing serious.
Okay. Sounds pretty serious to me. So secondly, what are those underlying principles that keep surveillance going? What is it that gives it its momentum? What is it that gets it to continue and become part of the routine of organizational life, and then by implication of our lives as well? So what is it that keeps things going in the present, and then what are the consequences of the new transparency for both institutions and for ordinary people? And as you can hear already, there is a dimension here. I mentioned the ethical and political dimension. There is a dimension here where we are definitely raising questions of social justice. And if what I've said is correct, and we've found plenty of evidence that it is, that cumulative disadvantage tends to occur the more these kinds of surveillance processes are put into action, then it's incumbent on us to consider those particular consequences in a particularly focused way. I would argue myself that if any system of governance is worth anything, then it will pay particular attention to those whose voices are weakest, to those who are the most vulnerable, those who are likely to be disadvantaged by the operation of the kinds of systems that we're talking about. So it seems to me that this too, the consequences, is singularly important. Surveillance, as we see it, is the product of a number of different forces. We're certainly not conspiracy theorists. We're certainly not thinking that surveillance is produced from one particular source. It's a product of multiple forces. It also varies nationally and organizationally. So we're coming from a set of different organizational backgrounds in our research, and also from different countries and different regions around the world. So we want to understand in a comparative way how surveillance differs in different situations. It's quite clear that though some of the technologies, for example, data mining and so on, may be somewhat similar across different domains and in different regions, the consequences are going to be different given different cultural and political setups. Surveillance usually relies on technology. I made this point already. A lot of what we think of as surveillance relies on technology. Let's not forget that there are basic kinds of surveillance that depend on the face-to-face, that depend on undercover agents, for example, or informers, or whatever. There are many ways in which surveillance occurs without direct technological mediation. But the burden of what we're doing has to do with technologically mediated forms of surveillance. So it's a set of social and cultural processes that certainly raise questions of what is public and what is private. Certainly it's the case that people in my generation tend to look at something like Facebook or MySpace and say, why in the world would these people want to put all those private things into a public domain? But it really does just show my age, because those aren't the ways in which those spaces are construed. They aren't thought of in those terms. The definitions of public and private and what can be out there and what should be kept in here shift all the time. They're highly malleable, highly fluid. And so we certainly raise those questions about what is public and what is private and what is important about the private and the public. We could argue, for example, that the big question today is not how can I keep certain things private, but how can I live publicly in the world out there, whether online or on the street or wherever. How can I live out there publicly without fear that somehow my record might skew my chances, might prevent access, might disadvantage me in some way. That's more the question, not can I be private, but can I be public? So there are many ways of construing that public-private issue. It's also a product of relations of power that have huge consequences for governance. And in many of the dimensions of what we're looking at, those relations of power are front and center. Some definitions, just run through these quickly. These are the ones that we are using within this project as a sort of starting point, as a springboard to try to clarify them and to see whether these make sense. Any focused attention to personal details for the purpose of entitlement, influence, control, management, care, protection, whatever else you like to put in there. Transparency, the widespread social practices of generalized surveillance that render visible, most often to organizations, individual identities, institutional mechanisms, and information flows. So that's the kind of way we're thinking about transparency. Social sorting, use of searchable databases in particular to facilitate creation and automated sifting of categories, obtaining differential outcomes for different groups. Governance, any strategy, tactic, program, or process of rule, regulation, or shaping of relations of an organization, locality, or nation, including but going beyond the formal powers of the nation state. So those are the sorts of definitions with which we're starting. And we'll move forward with those, and we may well come to some quite different ones as we go along. Key surveillance trends. We thought about this a lot as we were making our initial proposal. What is it that is particularly important about the surveillance world today? How should we construe those key trends that will inform the specific studies that we engage in? And we came up with three that I think encompass most things that are really important for our project anyway. Profiling, prediction, and preemptive methods, that's what I was referring to with the actuarial approach, the classification based on probabilities to determine certain kinds of differential outcomes. That are, it's the pre-crime department from Minority Report. It's that sense that we can somehow second guess what's going to happen and base current decisions of all kinds on that actuarial method. Also the criminalization of personal data. Increasingly, all kinds of personal information are being used for purposes far beyond what they were originally intended for. And increasingly those have to do with the criminalization of those data. Can this be used for law enforcement? Can this be used for national security? Can this be used in ways that, as I say, were not intended, but contribute to or build up to a story of increasing criminalization of personal data? And the third, the consequences of surveillance for citizenship. Again, crucially important. And again, across a range of areas in which our research takes place, we're seeing that the consequences of surveillance for citizenship are moving towards a more exclusionary mode. From a more inclusionary towards a more inclusionary mode. And it's part of the logic, part of that actuarial logic that I was referring to a moment ago. The kinds of methods that we're using have to do with documentary ones of many different kinds. Interviewing, trying to discover both from those who run surveillance systems or who manage them or who operate them, but also from those who are one way or another affected by them. Interviewing, trying to understand from people themselves how surveillance works. Case studies, numerous different case studies in not only in Canada, in many other countries. And comparative between institutional areas and organizations, but especially comparative between different regions and countries in the world. One of the things that we've tried to emphasize in our project is the ways in which, whereas surveillance is frequently seen in global north terms, especially with the massive growth of homeland security and so on, that surveillance that occurs in countries in the global south is also very interesting, crucially important for the life chances of those in the global south, and as I'll show in a moment, also interesting and consequential for life chances of those in the global north, as it happens. So it's a two-way process, and the comparative work that we're trying to initiate and encourage with countries and colleagues in countries in the global south is going to be a tremendously stimulating and, I think, productive aspect of what we're doing in this project. So we're working along the lines of those questions, looking at those trends with those definitions, and so on and so forth. But when it comes down to it, we've divided our research into 4 areas. We've called them integrated sub-projects just to remind us constantly that they are intended to work with the other projects that are going on. Ours is an overarching research program that's intended to bring together from many different researchers, different disciplines, different countries, certain kinds of insights into the surveillance that I've just been outlining to you. So there are 4 research sub-projects, integrated sub-projects, that will occur during the first 42 months of our project. And there is a 5th one that will kick in for the second half of our project. So it's like 3 full IRSPs that will run through the whole program, and 2 half ones, one in the first half, one in the second half. The integrated sub-projects are as follows. The first one has to do with the role of technology companies in promoting surveillance internationally. And the names that are listed here are the names of the people who are co-leaders of each of the sub-projects. And in this one, we are basically looking at the political economy of surveillance. We're trying to understand the economic drivers and the ways in which surveillance is being fostered and developed in and through and by technology companies. This isn't something that has been done systematically before, and we're very keen to try to understand exactly what is going on here. And of course, the relationship between government procurement and those corporations is also tremendously important and highly influential. When you think, for example, that even in little old Canada, 24 billion has been put into national security that is mainly in relation to surveillance devices since 2001, since 9/11. When you think that in the United States, Homeland Security itself has given $130 billion worth of contracts to private corporations, when you think that between, just within the year 2003, $327 billion was provided by the Bush administration for private corporations in this area, you realize that we're talking big money. It's very large scale. The figures that we're relating to, that I've just given you for the United States, I mean, that figure of the US administration is bigger than the GDP of Chile or the Czech Republic, just to give you some sense of the magnitude of what we're talking about. So the corporate involvement in surveillance industries globally is becoming a tremendously important driver for surveillance. That's the first of our IRSPs. The second one has to do with digital media surveillance, right through the gamut from internet to ubiquitous computing, or ambient intelligence as it's sometimes called in Europe. So here we have the world of digital media, which, some doomsday watchers will tell you that as soon as you go online, everything that you do, or even what you think, is going to be recorded by someone out there, and you're in trouble as soon as you touch one of these machines. Well, this IRSP is going to look in detail, sure, at those kinds of claims, but at what actually happens when people go online. What are the limits, legal, technical, and other, to that sort of doomsday world of online activity? Sure, we'll be looking at some of the negative consequences of digital media, but we're trying to understand in a systematic way what happens online in terms of surveillance. Some of the work that we're doing, of course, is building on what members of the team are already working on. We're building, for example, in this one, out of some of the work that Andrew Clement and his colleagues have been doing at the University of Toronto. So some of these things come out of already existing interests and programs. And here too, we have Daniel, wherever he is doing his PhD on Facebook. Well, there's another example of an online domain where surveillance occurs, and in the case of the work Dan's doing, on several levels simultaneously. Both those who are peer surveilling each other, those who are being seen, as it were, by the organizations within which they work through Facebook, and also the corporate and security and policing use of Facebook. So there are many dimensions and levels to this, even if we think of just one domain such as Facebook itself. The third integrated sub-project, International Surveillance Consequences of 9/11. I've already mentioned this in several ways already. That odd-looking map that you see there is the Pentagon's view of the post-9/11 world. And, I'll tell you where I found it, and you can look at it more closely later. And, of course, the line is an airport security line, if you hadn't realized what is going on there. I suspect that IRSP and its work is fairly self-evident. Maybe I should point out at this stage that we have the involvement in our team of others as well as academics. It's really important to us that we work alongside other groups, and in particular, Roch Tassé is here today from the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, and also Patricia Poirier. I can't see either of them, but I know they're here. There they are. The work that they do is helping us to understand and direct the research that we do. They're interested in the research that we're doing. We're interested in what they're finding out about the people that come to them, especially in relation to 9/11. The International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group was set up as a consequence of 9/11 as a coalition of human rights and civil liberties groups in order to try to understand what was going on and to respond appropriately and responsibly. The fourth IRSP has to do with population management, urban control, Middle East, Europe, and North America. And we're looking particularly at the case of Israel and the occupied territories. So this Israel-Palestine IRSP is going to actually run the first of our research workshops, which will happen in December this year. And we're looking specifically at states of exception and surveillance and those kinds of issues in the Israel-Palestine setup. And we're trying to understand all sorts of things that have to do with borders and checkpoints, to do with airline security, that have to do with numerous ways in which security and surveillance is being worked out in the Israeli context. Now, I've already given you one reason why it's tremendously important for us to think about other countries outside the immediate North Atlantic kind of axis. And that has to do with the inclusion of countries that have been or are being colonized and those that have been disadvantaged within the global south. But another really important one is that we too, here in Canada, also in the United States, are developing security and surveillance agreements and arrangements with Israel. So what's the consequence of that? What does that mean for, well, those of us who are Canadians and live in Canada? March 27th this year, Stockwell Day shook hands on a security partnership with Israel, with Avi Dichter, and that agreement is still fairly vague at the moment, but it clearly relates to surveillance technology industries and to a number of security arrangements for things like airports and borders. So does that mean that we're going to have El Al type security on Air Canada? Well, we don't know, but it sure is an interesting question. So it's not only that we're interested in the countries that may not be within the immediate sphere of the global north, but also that they may well be entering important relationships with us. You may be aware that already Israel is selling surveillance technologies to the United States in particular for border security purposes, both American, Mexican, and American, Canadian. And here's the fifth one. It has to do with resistance and oppositional movements to surveillance, and we're looking at cross-national studies here. This is the one that will not start until halfway through our research program, although, of course, a number of us are interested in questions of negotiation and resistance and opposition to surveillance. But that one will start up seriously as a research dimension of our work after the halfway point of our project. It's also important to see, again, that these connect together. And we have a couple of meetings that are going to bring these different IRSP research projects together. These are two of them. There's a sense in which all our workshops will have some connection with all of the IRSPs, but these two in particular, the Surveillance Games meeting that we hope to hold in Vancouver probably next year, so prior to the Winter Olympics in Vancouver, when we're looking at the ways in which surveillance and security is obviously huge at such mega events, but what the specific ways that they operate are and what kinds of programs they engage to do security and surveillance at an event like the Olympics. We're bringing people into that project who have an interest in Athens and Beijing and London as well, and try to get some kind of overall picture of Olympics as a mega event that produces or attracts huge surveillance and security interests, and also leaves a legacy of surveillance equipment that in the place where they have been where that equipment has been used as a test bed or a pilot plant, and to look at those in a serious way. The other has to do, again, a fairly obvious topic for us, is to hold a major conference in September of 2011 to look at 9/11 10 years on. So we hope to run that, and for both of those, the different IRSPs will feed into the research workshops. We're a very research workshop-driven kind of project, and it's a way of doing things that has worked for us in the past, and we intend to continue with that. Here are some details. Those of you in the team know them already. 33 scholars plus students. Not that students aren't scholars, but I was trying to think of a way that would indicate that although full team members, according to SSHRC, are the faculty members, we regard students, and SSHRC encourage us to regard students very much as part of what we're doing. That's why there's a dozen or so graduate students here today. 9 different countries, 9 different disciplines, 20 different universities, across the disciplinary range, and our single largest group of people involved in the team is Canadian, followed by Britain and then the US, and with important contributions from France. Unfortunately, our French friends could not be with us this time, and in fact, some of the others had a hard time getting here. We have our Australian, and we have our Mexican here, but these are people who really were very sad that they couldn't show up for this particular event. So that's the team. Here is, as it were, the story of the surveillance project and how what we're doing links in with the surveillance project. Right back from 1984, Elia Zurich and Lorene Snyder working together on a workshop that had surveillance dimensions to it, right through to this year, where we started a group called SCAN, the Surveillance Camera Awareness Network, and of course, in the present tense, the new Transparency launches. So that brings us in our little history to the present. These are the things that we're going to be doing by way of major events during the program. I mentioned them already, and there they are on the screen for you. We have partners and stakeholders, a number of them. I mentioned the ICLMG already. These are some of the other groups with which we are connected. Partners and stakeholders are people who work with us to various degrees, either directly, like ICLMG, who are really working alongside us in our research work, through to others who consider themselves as recipients of the work, who are interested in and who want to know about the kind of work that we are engaged in. So those are some of them. The outcomes of our project, well, we have a whole list there. One exciting aspect of this is that we're hoping to have both to work towards an art installation, one that would show first here in the Agnes Etherington Art Centre, that is one of our partners, and Jan Allen is here from the Agnes this afternoon. And that's something we hope might be portable as well, such that it could be an installation that could go elsewhere and raise interest in and encourage an understanding of the kinds of surveillance issues that we're looking at. And also the idea of developing a documentary film. We've been thinking about this for some time, and with this project I think we're going to be able to move towards a full-length made-for documentary TV film. And Sheila Petzold is here, and she is very closely involved in this. She is a filmmaker. I can't see Sheila right now, but you'll get to meet her during the reception. So Sheila's involved as a filmmaker, and we're going to be working together with Peter Raymond, very well-known Canadian filmmaker, to make this film happen. And the other items are listed there. I won't go further. One of them is the new website, and there you see the, well, actually it's not going to look quite like that, but we wanted to show it to you. This is the version we got yesterday. Noah, who's working on this, is also here with us this afternoon. This is the kind of thing that it's going to look like. The lady looking down from the top of the CN Tower through the glass and worrying about the distance between her and the ground below is not going to appear there, but some other image will be there. And these are the people to whom we are grateful for what we do in our project. Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada has given us quite a few $1 million now. This project, for this project, they've given us $2.5 million. We're very grateful to them. Sorry that we couldn't have a SSHRC person here this afternoon. The project itself, of course, has helped to spawn the New Transparency Project, And then the university nodes of our project are also financial contributors to our research program as a whole, and they should not be forgotten for that. So University of Toronto, University of Alberta, Queen's, the Open University, and University of Victoria have each also given to this project. So we're supported by a number of different organizations, and that doesn't entirely exhaust the funding, and we are, of course, also looking for further funding. This is a research project that goes to collaborative efforts. So what it really supports is our ability to get together and discuss the research that we're doing. It doesn't cover all the primary research costs, which, as we go along, we're also seeking funding for. So there's the New Transparency in a nutshell. It's a tremendously exciting project intellectually, ethically, and tremendously important, I think, too, in terms of politically and in terms of social justice. Thank you very much. We are going to start our reception with a couple of guests in about 10 minutes. But we've got time for some questions if you want to ask questions about the project. Team members are welcome to ask questions. Visitors who have just come to see what we're up to are welcome to ask questions as well. Want to clarify anything that I've said, or test it, object to what I've said? I know what it is. You want to get to the reception. Yeah, Sherry.
I have a conceptual/definition question for you as a sociologist and coming from outside that discipline. I understand from the presentation and much of the supporting documentation I read around this project that there's really an emerging field of surveillance studies. And I'm wondering how you relate as a field to the sort of prior existing security studies domain, and what you see are the points of intersection and divergence.
Really good question, and there are several people here who I'm sure would also want to give an answer to that. Security studies, has been going for a number of years and was probably defined, particularly in international relations contexts, before we started talking about surveillance studies, although we did start talking about surveillance studies at least 10 years ago. We regard the surveillance questions as the ones that are focusing on just that. The questions of the both literal and literary gaze. What we're trying to do is to understand the ways in which people and organizations are seen. So we're trying to understand those processes in particular. As I said, the definition of surveillance, if it is surveillance at all, has always got to be connected to some kind of purpose. It's got to be a purposive watching, observing, gazing, whatever you call it, in order for it to be surveillance. Otherwise you have such a flaccid definition that it just covers everything. So among those purposes would be security. So I would see it as surveillance in relation to the security purpose. Now, of course, both terms are also contested terms. Both terms are deeply controversial in some very significant ways. But just in general terms, I would see the one as being a purpose to which surveillance is yoked, or a kind of end, whether spurious or genuine or whatever we think about security, an end to which this surveillance would be the means. So it's the way we do things in order to achieve certain goals. Does that make sense? Other questions, comments? Yeah.
One of the final bullet on your outcome slide was something about research repositories. Could you expand on that?
Well, we've thought of various ways in which we can make our research available to broader publics, and we're very keen to do that. At the moment, it's a category within our intentions. In our previous project, for example, we ran a very large-scale international survey as part of that project, and that has or is almost in the public domain. It's gone to the Queen's Data Archive, and from there it is going to be available. And in fact, it's in some ways pre-processed. It's user-friendly for anyone who wants to use it. So that's an example of the kind of repository, but we hope to use a lot of online materials for online access to findings of the project and so on. So we hope that that will develop. At this stage, we're meeting together to discuss where the project is going. Some of those things are ones that we have yet to decide, but that should give you some clue. Yeah, other comments or questions? Okay, why don't we turn to next part of our program then, and we'll be all the more swiftly into reception. Okay, a couple of people I want to introduce to you, and they've kindly agreed to make a few comments for us. And one is from Queen's University, and the other is one of our partner and stakeholder people. And I'm delighted that each could be here this afternoon just to show their rapport with the sort of thing that we're about, and to, in the first case, give a welcome from Queen's University. So I want to welcome Loreen Ratcliffe, first of all. Now, Loreen is an Associate Dean with specific responsibility for research within the Faculty of Arts and Science. And she is from the Department of Biology, done some really interesting work on the songs of chickadees. Things are really good for some people, eh? Songs of chickadees appeals a lot. Anyway, Loreen, among other things, works on chickadees. She is in biology, so she's also cross-listed in women's studies and in psychology. And because of her work as a research associate dean, I've asked her to make a few comments. Thanks, Loreen.
Thanks, David. So on behalf of Vice Principal Research Carrie Rowe, I'm very pleased to be here and to make a few remarks at this inaugural team meeting of the New Transparency Project. It's a wonderful celebration of the team's success in winning an MCRI, which, as we know, is going to be funded for the next 7 years with several millions of dollars. And I'd just like to congratulate again David Lyon, who spearheaded this initiative, who's well known for his multidisciplinary research, and also his colleagues who have been involved in this initiative. We're really pleased at Queen's to see this bringing together of people from different departments, but also from around the world. I mean, that's a wonderful, wonderful attribute of this project. And we are also very appreciative of the support that's going to be coming from both industry and government. Now, Carrie is currently in Australia, but joins me in spirit with the Faculty of Arts and Science in our congratulations. And it's not just really the talent and the track record of you as a group, but also the innovative and really unique nature of your proposed research. And here's where my background in chickadee songs comes in. As a behavioral biologist, I can assert that surveillance is a very old behavior, evolutionarily speaking. And research in the last 5 to 7 years now tells us that animals as diverse, and maybe you're thinking as primitive, but animals as diverse as things like crickets, fish, songbirds, and chimpanzees all acquire and use public information. And they get this information about conspecifics, often in very covert ways. And then, of all things, they use this information to make adaptive decisions that lead to improvements of their own selfish ends. So when you talk about increasing life chances, I think of parallels with songbirds. And part of my work with chickadees has involved experimental demonstration of eavesdropping by birds, leading to their increased reproductive success out in the field. So we know this is a real phenomenon. We can actually manipulate it. So I do have a really strong interest in the work that you're doing. For humans, of course, modern-day surveillance technology has led to what I would term, and others have termed, an unprecedented capacity to gather ever more detailed information at ever-increasing distances. And as one of the assessors of your initial application observed, surveillance is closely linked to the everyday life of ordinary people. And while it offers new possibilities for the public, it also creates yet unknown risks. And I think this really captures the widely held view that with every technical advance in information gathering come more and more questions. What information is being gathered? Why is it being gathered? And most probably important, how is it going to be used? On a daily basis, we hear about surveillance. So just last night, I was listening to the CBC News, until I prepared these remarks rather recently. There were two stories. One involved the implanting of chips in post-operative heart patients, and these chips transmit vital information to surgeons after the patients leave hospital. And then secondly, a story about the refurbishment, I didn't realize it was a refurbishment, but apparently it is, of aquatic and terrestrial listening posts up in the Arctic at the entrance to the Northwest Passage. This is part of Canada's High Arctic Northern Watch program, a program that's been stimulated by a variety of events, including global warming. So these things are all interconnected. And as these sources for information collection increase in greater and greater volume, society needs to understand the forces that are driving this growth in surveillance and the social consequences of this new transparency. And I think this MCR is very clear from the presentation, creates the opportunity for some of the best minds in the world to gather together to answer these questions and provide guidance for policymakers. So in closing these very brief remarks, I'd like to acknowledge that in putting together the successful application, David and the team did receive help and support from several sources at Queen's, especially the Office of the VP Research, and especially, I think your term is former projects advisor, Karina McInnes, who I know worked very hard on behalf of the team. And the VP Research and the Faculty of Arts and Science are just delighted that we're able to support the recruitment of a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in the area of surveillance studies. And this will very much lead to an enhanced training environment and hopefully more research. So in closing, we wish you every success, David, to you and your team, and enjoy the reception.
Thank you, Loreen. I also want to introduce another friend, and this is Jennifer Stoddart. Jennifer Stoddart has had a long and distinguished career in public service, was previously the Privacy Commissioner for Quebec, and is now the Federal Privacy Commissioner in Ottawa. I'm very glad that she's here. Over the years, we've built up an increasingly good relationship with that office and with Jennifer herself. She's taken a keen interest in the kind of work that we're doing in our various projects. So I couldn't think of anyone better, actually, to come and give us a few comments this afternoon. So thank you very much indeed, Jennifer.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. And I know I'm the only thing between you and happy hour now, so I too will be brief. Anyway, I'm here to celebrate this project, to congratulate you all who are part of it, as it will certainly help to inform the global debate about ever-expanding surveillance. It's such an impressive research team. I learned more about it from your presentation, David, and I didn't realize I have a whole list of Canadians here, or people based in Canada, and I didn't realize there were people in Mexico, France, and the Netherlands, and so on. So this is extremely impressive. You all know from the point of view of the Office of the Privacy Commission, we recognize that Professor David Lyon has made a very significant contribution to privacy studies in Canada. He's brought an important new perspective, pioneering a focus very little looked at until now on the social impact of privacy issues. He's highlighted the risks of social sorting, as he calls it, based on the huge amounts of personal information collected about all of us each day. My office funded one of Professor Lyon's research projects on location technologies through our contributions program. And that project, completed in 2005, explored the potential social impacts resulting from the spread of location technologies. It pointed out how location-based service markets will be used as a means of tracking, profiling, and sorting different types of customers, travelers, workers, and citizens. Through our contributions program, we've also funded, and I'm mentioning them because they're part of the overall research program, Professor Colin Bennett, Location-Based Service and the Surveillance of Mobility and Analysis of Privacy Risks in Canada, 2005. Professor Andrew Clement, 2 projects as part of a group, as I remember, implementing PIPEDA, Review of Internet Privacy Statements and Online Practices, 2005, and just last year, CanID, Visions for Canada's Identity Policy, Understanding Identity Policy and Policy Alternatives, a team project with Privacy International, as I remember. So at my office, we strongly believe in the importance of privacy research. That's why I thought it was important to be here today. Why? Because research can help guide our advice to Parliament. It helps our understanding of how Canada's privacy laws, one as bad as it is, should be administered. Over the past 5 years that I have been in this office, we've contributed $1.5 million to the contributions program. So it's little bits, but I think it does add up to, I hope, a significant contributions. Some of the main themes explored to date have been consumer privacy, marketplace compliance, guidance for privacy professionals, business organizations, health information, privacy and technology, surveillance, and workplace privacy. And we'll be announcing the list of recipients for 2008 very soon, and I'm sure there are candidates from Queen's University. In fact, I know they are. So David Lyon and all the other members of this impressive project, your project will be examining, from my point of view, key questions. I'll be extremely interested to hear your findings on the social consequences of surveillance for both institutions and for ordinary people. Why the fear, but yet the buy-in to a surveillance society? A question that I'm constantly asked by the media. What about the role of business and technology in promoting innovative types of surveillance, something that both David Lyon and I agree, and I see in my work, is an increasing trend. The gadget is there. Why not buy it? You'll be safer, smarter, more enhanced. How do different generations and societies react to this as privacy commissioners around the world attempt to come together through different cultures, different laws, different political systems faced with a common phenomenon? And that's one of my current challenges. How does increased surveillance change our behavior? How does this cause and effect vary by type and frequency of the surveillance and the identity and the resources of those surveyed? What effect do normative frameworks have on the deployment of surveillance structures and their effect on those surveyed? Those were some of the questions I just asked myself, even more recently than you, coming down in the car. Surveillance legislation in Canada and other countries was designed with traditional data protection concepts in mind. The collection of personal information to determine whether we are eligible for a particular government benefit. For example, surveillance for other purposes raises more complex questions for privacy protection. Your research can help us better understand the constantly changing surveillance environment so that we at the OPC can address its new challenges. Surveillance and social sorting are not new phenomenon, as Professor Lyon said. Familiar to us is the effective spying of good Queen Bess and the rigid caste system of medieval Europe, to take 2 examples in our own society. But surveillance now is a more vast, more effectively managed, and can focus on the minutiae of our lives. Unlike eligibility for government benefits or participation in a class-defined society, contemporary social sorting is often invisible and intangible, thus your title, The New Transparency. Those who are its objects may never apprehend how choices have been made for them. Societies like ours require that its citizenry benefit from autonomies of individuals and from equality of opportunity. To what extent does a 21st century version of surveillance modifies this? Finally, I applaud the plan that you have demonstrated to publish your findings not only in academic journals and popular publications throughout the 7 years, in blogs and other interactive media venues. Surveillance and its impact on privacy are issues people should be debating around the water cooler, I think. So in concluding, thank you very much for inviting me here. I see a lot of friends in the audience. Good luck with your project. We'll be watching you very carefully and watching the results very carefully. And I can't say enough about how important this project is to the administration of Canada's privacy laws. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you again, Noreen. And thank you all for coming. Delighted to see you all here. Obviously, my fellow team members, I'm delighted to see you. I'm delighted to see all the visitors that have also joined us this afternoon. I hope you're all able to stay for the reception, which I now declare to be open. Welcome.